have you all here today, and excited to get started. So without further ado, this is our agenda for today. So we'll spend a little bit of time talking about owning your career and what that really means at the sort of senior leadership levels. Then we'll talk about self-advocacy and how to build your brand. This is definitely more across the company and be able to influence beyond just your specific team or your specific management chain. And then lastly, we'll spend the bulk of our time on navigating bias and mastering performance reviews. Again, everything kind of comes down to whether it's official or unofficial, these performance conversations that happen that get you into officially your next role. I'll try to save 10-15 minutes at the end for questions as well. And you know where to find me on LinkedIn otherwise. So a little bit about myself. So I am currently a career coach and a venture partner with LifeX Ventures. I primarily focus on coaching directors, heads of product, heads of functions, and helping them get to that VP plus level. I was formerly the Chief Product and Technology Officer at Fuzzy Pet Health. Spent some time at Meta and Instagram, and was the first PM at Thumbtack. Saw them through that really amazing growth period for 5 or so years and ran the supply side of the marketplace for product. All right, so without further ado, topic 1, owning your career. Quick poll, and Chris, you can help me on this. Do you know, if you think about it, what it will take to get to the next level of your career? Yes, I know what it takes, and I kind of know what to do. No, I have no idea. Like, I have some inkling, some guesses, but not super sure. And then last is kind of in the middle. Like, I have some idea. There's some things I'm working towards. Maybe your manager has told you a few things, and maybe your peers have given you suggestions, but I'm not really sure like whether that's the right thing for me to focus on, or if there's other things that I need.
And you, I also have the next slide's question up in this poll as well, if you want to read that out now as well.
Perfect. And then related to that, have you talked to your leadership about what it will take? So potential answers here. Yes, I have. And what they've given me in terms of guidance makes sense. And I know exactly what I need to do. 2, yes, I have talked to them, but I'm not super clear on what it is that I really need to do. They gave me some general guidance, but hey, open to interpretation. Or no, it hasn't really come up in my one-on-ones, or I don't have one-on-ones. Hopefully most people have, but never take it for granted. So it seems like we've got a crowd where for the first question, most people have some idea, but not sure it's sufficient. This is very common. You may hear a lot of people get some advice on being more strategic, having more influence, build some relationships. And they're like, okay, what does that mean? And you know, what are the rules for getting there? And what exactly do I need to accomplish? And I think for the second question, I'm glad that everybody is speaking up and making people aware, making their leadership aware. That's amazing. I'm really glad to see that. And yeah, the concrete direction can be very difficult. Sort of, there's a lot of ambiguity in what exactly needs to happen, when it might happen by. So amazing. So let's talk about both of these a little bit. And this is where kind of owning your, this is a bit of a trick question. Sorry, let me get rid of this poll window. Comes in, because this is why we're talking about owning our own career. Well, the truth is, you've got to own it. You've got to do the work to demystify it, because there isn't somebody else in the room, in the company, or even, you know, a career coach or anything who can tell you exactly what needs to happen. A lot of people, when they get to that middle management phase, believe that their manager or their leadership can kind of tell them, hey, if you do these 3 things, then you'll get promoted. And that actually may have been true for the first 1 or 2 promotions, where you do a good job, you know, kind of ask, what do I need to get done? You do the particular thing, you over deliver, and you get promoted. unfortunately, kind of going from a senior manager director to VP and above, there's no longer that very concrete, like, here are the things you need to do. And no one really at the company can give you that directly. And it's really not enough to just do the work that your manager gives you. That is sufficient to keep you at the company and probably keep your manager happy and your leadership happy, but it will not move you up. That will just kind of keep you at your role. And for some people, that's good enough. And for some people, that's what they want. But if that's not what you want and you want to keep moving up at the company, then it is not sufficient. I've also seen people sort of play more of a martyr approach where they take one for the team. They sort of take on these side projects whenever they get asked. And it's a little bit every time it comes up, or there's this thing that no one else really wants to do, or there's a team that needs a little bit more love, and they take one for the team and they do that role. And they think that in doing that and taking that action, it progresses their career. Let me tell you, that also doesn't progress your career. It's one of the components that could have adds to your view as doing things for the team and doing things for the company, but that in of itself is not going to make that progression happen. And then sort of the last point I have here is your manager is not responsible for ensuring you're promoted. A lot of people have the opinion or perception that it's their manager's job to help them get promoted. The truth is they're not. Their job is to make sure that you are performing at your level, and that you are, if you're a high performer, that you're happy with that. And with that, sometimes that involves making sure that you see the growth that you want to see, but that's a secondary consideration rather than a primary consideration. Their primary goal, which I'll talk about more later, is to ensure that the business is moving forward, and that you are performing at your level. Next. All right. Most managers do want to support your career. I've been a manager of many myself. I'm very passionate about supporting people's career growth across companies, whether they are currently reporting to me or not. But there are some truths and facts of being in a job that managers have to deal with that makes your career ambitions not their top priority most of the time. First, there are times where the business needs, so as in what projects need to get done, what priorities are important, what skill sets are needed, does not overlap with what it is you want to do or need to do to develop the skills that you need to make that next transition. Sometimes they overlap, and that's a very, very easy decision for managers to put you on those projects where, you have career growth and then the business wins and you win. But there are times where it does not overlap, and often the manager has to have a tough decision of potentially choosing that business need over what it is you need to grow in your career. Second, your manager doesn't have access to all the potential growth opportunities, right? Your manager is still just seeing their world and their piece of the pie. And there may be opportunities elsewhere in other parts of the organization and other parts of the company that they either are not aware of or can't really raise their hand for you and say like, hey, Yue should be I would love you to be considered for this project. And so while they may have the best intentions of always finding you the best opportunities, they're not spending their time doing networking for your growth opportunities because and there will be those opportunities that are outside of your immediate team. Their point, they manage a team or teams of teams. So the amount of time they can spend on your particular career is going to be limited versus how much time you can spend on your particular career. And so while even the best managers with the best intentions will have limited amount of time to devote to your particular scenario. And then the last point is it's a competitions, right? So we have hierarchical organizations. At the end of the day, only one person gets to become VP, or maybe two, depending on the size of the organization. But you always will have, let's say, 4 to 6 people from a product org perspective reporting to that particular person. And so it's got a competition. Not everybody is going to be able to get promoted, even if everybody is amazing and everybody is ready to go. It's a competition. And at the end of the day, one person wins that competition in terms of promotion. So most managers want to support your career, but they have these sort of natural challenges and things that will hinder them from doing 100%, and what you could do for yourself in these situations. All right. So what does it mean to own your own career? Now that we know, like, you may have an amazing manager, they may be very invested in your career. By the end of the day, you've got to own it. What does it mean to own it? First and foremost, schedule career one-on-ones in addition to your usual one-on-ones. This has happened so many times. I've seen this so many times where people have one-on-ones and they say like, oh yeah, next week, let's talk about your career. And then it doesn't happen because you spend 20 minutes talking about, you know, some problem that has come up within the past week. And then you maybe spend like 5 minutes being like, oh, we should really talk about your career next time. Schedule a separate career one-on-one from your normal one-on-one so that that time can be devoted to talking about your career. I recommend monthly. You can make it more or less frequent. Make it a separate note so it's not like piecemeal along with your other one-on-ones for work, and focus that entire document on your career, not work, quote unquote work. That will make sure that there is time dedicated and there's a running sort of history and context of the conversations that have taken place and things that you're actively working on, etc. That goes to point number 2, which is understand as much as you can what the expectations are and how you're progressing towards it. Now, you might not know, and your manager may not know exactly what will get you to that next level, but they will have some expectation in mind. They'll have some sense of, this is what I need to see Yue performing at, to even consider the conversation of, hey, what does it take to be a VP? Write those down, map them against any kind of like leveling doc or performance rubric you may or may not have. Know where you are today, know where you need to go. And then very clearly know kind of what is it that you can do to demonstrate those things. And these may be options because it may not be one thing that you could do. It may be multiple things you can do. Just note like, hey, here's the gap that I see between where I am today and where I need to go across different dimensions. And show, and then write down ideas and brainstorm ideas on what needs to happen for that new expectation to be met. And then as you make progress, or as you think you make progress, jot it down and have a discussion with your manager. The next career one to be like, I think I've made progression on this dimension because here's what I've done, here's what happened. Do you agree? This puts you guys on the same page and also allows you to make sure that what it is that you have done is seen and noted and like in your manager's head about like, hey, you has done this and it's done differently. And then at some point also ask the question like, am I performing at the next level? Do you think I'm performing at the next level? If not, what is still the thing that's missing? Here's all the things I've done. Here's what we've talked about. Do you feel like I'm performing at the next level on this dimension? And what else do I need to improve? So that keeps the conversation very fact-based, much less subjective, much less kind of open to bias and just whatever they remembered. And then lastly, compare your plan to other promotions that have happened internally, or to people at the roles that you want to be at externally. This is basically a way to triangulate whether those career expectations that your manager may have that you've been working towards, does it resonate with recent promotions that have happened and what those people have done or have been known for, or equivalent roles at competitors. Like if you were to go tomorrow and go to a competitor and try to get that next level job, what are they expecting? And how similar are the things that you're working on to their expectations? This kind of avoids the your manager might not know what's best conversation and allows you to sort of triangulate what you're doing with additional data points to get the best sort of goal setting, if you will. Career coaches are also great at doing this, especially if they've worked in industry or in positions that you are aspiring towards. They can also give you a sense of like, okay, or mentors as well, like this is where you need to be, and this is where I think you need to be, and these are the things that you will need to get to that director plus VP level. All right, so this is all you driving your career forward proactively, like jotting things down, noting what needs to happen and making progress, and then communicating that progress with your manager. So that gets us a little bit into the second part, which is like, how do you start advocating for yourself? How do you start advocating for the work that you're doing and building a brand for yourself as a leader within the company? This is my corgi. I
Ô,
have a
Ju, antes de
corgi.
passar aqui, desculpa, volta no.
Oh, I did not understand that. Sorry. So let's talk about your superpower. Your superpower is a shortcut way for people to understand what type of leader you are and what type of context you excel in. That is, in short, what you want to build for yourself, so that when someone mentions your name, they say like, hey, do you know Yue? They're like, oh yeah, Yui's that amazing product person, or Yui is that amazing growth person. A little more specifically, I'll get into that. But you want to be associated with a particular set of skill sets and context in which you excel. And so let me give you one example, which is what I've been known as when I was working on product as my superpower, which is really understanding user needs and business strategy and combining them together such that when you solve the user need and the problem, it generates a very profitable business for the company. It's this ability to combine the user empathy with business and being able to make money and put them together in product features that really drive growth. So how do you figure out what it is that is your superpower? The starting point for a lot of this is there anything you're particularly good at or particularly enjoy doing or find yourself gravitating towards or just spending a little more time on? Is there something that when you're in a team meeting, when you're in a group of people, they often say like, oh, let's ask Yui about this, or let's ask Yui is really good at this. And you just overhear other people mentioning things like that. That is sort of a good starting point. I have on this slide sort of just some thought starters, like some people are really amazing at evangelizing visions. So they're really good at painting a picture of like, this is what could happen. This is how we might get there. Here are the different pieces and telling a great story that motivates others. Some people are really good at identifying a special spark in others and really knowing like, hey, this is what Yui is really good at and she would be great on this particular job. Or this is what Yui is really looking for and she would be amazing in this particular situation. They're really good at matching people with what it is that they're good at. And then the last is like some people are great resolving conflict. I've had some coworkers where, you know, they walk in the room and they're just able to listen, empathize, and come up with a solution where, you know, 10 minutes ago, you're like, wait, I feel like we're deadlocked in this particular problem. And so they have this ability to just resolve issues when there's a large amount of conflict. Now, there are many, many different types of superpowers. And in fact, everyone's superpower is relatively unique, but I'll give sort of three very broad buckets of superpowers and why the matching it to the context matters. So the first is around a people leader. So similar to that middle bucket where in the previous slide, where it's about really understanding what is special and unique and the special skill set about their team. This person is really good at influencing others and bringing out the best in the team and getting lots of different types of people to work together. This type of superpower tends to be really, really useful in companies that are very global and work across many different cultures and time zones. They tend to be really useful in companies that are very people focused in terms of the service that they deliver and work with like very unique specialists. So like doctors' offices, taxes, attorneys, like they're very specialized in terms of the type of people they work with. And they're really good at getting an attorney or a doctor or a vet or someone who normally isn't talking to technology leaders all day to understand like how to build product, how to build, how do product companies operate, how do technologies companies operate, and bring the two worlds together because they're really, really great at understanding what each person needs. The second bucket is around this idea of a visionary leader. So they take in customer insights and data and they create an amazing vision that inspires others. This tends to be overwhelmingly true and found in startups and in companies that are building out new product lines, right? You want and need this person to get other people to believe that this really difficult thing is possible and paint a vision for what needs to happen in the future. They tend to be very, very great at just evangelizing. This is the problem. This is what needs to happen. This is why, we are uniquely positioned to tackle it. The last type I'll talk about here is the problem solver. So this person is really good at just fixing issues. You often find these people at larger companies, but their specialty is being able to get dropped in lots of different contexts and kind of just like fix the emergency or the fire that's at hand. And they're able to sort of get people to move and exit and like do things when the organization prior may have been stalled or uncertain about what directions to move in next. They can energize a team, they can move towards a goal and just like make progress when it feels more like a crisis to others, and there's also people just not knowing what really should happen. These types of people tend to do really well with transformations, mergers and acquisitions, which can be really messy and complicated. And also large organizations where you need a person who can just go around fixing fires or putting out fires, if you will, at these different places. So just 3 examples of what a superpower could look like, broadly speaking, and then what kinds of contexts do really well. Again, think about your own and develop your own because it will influence what types of companies really value you and the contributions you bring. And, in a more so than just a broad sort of, hey, I'm a great PM or I'm a great growth person. All right, so quick poll. And feel free to choose other because this is by no means an exhaustive view of the world. Curious for the people on this call, like what do you see yourself as? The closest, if you will. Amazing. Looks like we've got a quarter people leaders, a quarter visionary, and about half problem solving. Amazing. I think problem solving also tends to resonate a bit more with people more in their mid careers because that is what you have been doing for many for the sort of initial parts of your career. The challenge with problem solvers as you become more senior is that the types of problems and the types of environments where you have to go in and solve becomes almost exponentially more complicated in terms of function, in terms of topic, in terms of the degree of difficulty. And so it's an amazing, amazing skill to work on. But it can get challenging in terms of the various contexts. But it's such an amazing skill set and really, really needed. Awesome. So let me figure out how to close this again. So now that you have a sense of your superpower and what it may be, how do you then build a brand around it? So the first thing is actually when you're talking about things that you do it in the context of your superpower, as in talk about it. I am an amazing problem solver. Here's what I did. Here's a problem that I solved. Or start with, here is a problem that I have solved. Here's why it was so difficult. And you'd be surprised how often when you talk about yourself as a great problem solver or how you love solving problems, it comes around from others as, I heard Yue is an amazing problem solver. And you'll hear that through the grapevine. And that's kind of how you know, like, okay, I'm making progress on getting people to know that that is something that I want to be known for. The second is to volunteer for and seek out projects that match your superpower. I talked about in the beginning how some people just take on projects that they're given. To some extent, that is helpful, but you want to be strategic about the types of projects that you take on, and to the extent possible, take ones that match your superpower, where your superpower can shine. So if you're a visionary, maybe don't try to take on the like fire and crisis that really just needs execution. Rather than vision. I'm sure you can do it. I'm sure you'll do a great job, but it really doesn't showcase your ability to be visionary and get people bought into your vision. And so try to look for those projects that match your superpower so that you can really show your value and continue to build your brand. It's also funny how history predicts future in that if you do multiple projects in the same vein, you also start becoming known for being that person who is good at those types of projects. So if you do a bunch of projects that's related to solving problems and putting out fires, you're magically going to get more of those. And so it is important to think about and be thoughtful about what it is that you want to be known for and what it is you enjoy doing, and try as much as possible. Again, it can't always happen, but try as much as possible to steer in that direction and look for projects that allow you to use your superpower. The last thing I'll say is, like, sort of inside or outside of your company, writing about your philosophies is another way of building your brand and highlighting what it is that you're really good at. So some companies ask people to do blog posts. They may ask people to do all hands, lunch and learns. There's lots of ways internally to sort of get and share that knowledge there. You can also, I've seen it people do externally. Again, I don't know if everybody wants to start their own Substack or whatnot, but or be on LinkedIn, but it is a way of promoting what it is that you know and talking about what it is that you're passionate about. And allowing others, including people within your company and your managers, to know, hey, this is what Yue is great at, and this is what she thinks about and what she is passionate about. All right, I'm going to go on a little bit of a tangent and talk a little bit about minorities. So as many of you may know, when you look at executive levels, about 70 to 80%, depending on how you want to read the statistic, are white males. And so when you're a minority, so if you're women or if you're non-white male, they face kind of a different scenario when it comes to self-advocacy and some additional challenges. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that here. First, many minorities are taught to focus on doing the work rather than talking about the work. So this is a big mindset shift where in more Eastern cultures, you're taught to be humble, you're taught to do more and say less, and you're taught to sort of respect your authority, respect elders, don't interrupt them, don't disagree with them. And many of those sort of run contrary to what you actually need to be doing in self-advocacy, where you need to talk about your work, you need to put yourself out there. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to do that. But it's a mindset shift first, where it's doing the work is not enough. You actually need to advocate and talk about that work regularly. Second, women and minorities are more often interrupted when they do speak up. This is something I think that has been researched and talked about for quite a while now, but is still a good reminder that when you're doing self-advocacy, when you are speaking up, find opportunities to do it and kind of put in that extra effort. You may need to do that more because you may get interrupted, or you may not be given the opportunity to present at all hands or to, talk about what it is that your team is doing. So you need to be a little bit more proactive and persistent in speaking up. And then lastly, depending on who you are and some racial stereotypes, certain groups of people are more easily perceived as rude or aggressive. And that is something that may hinder sort of the self-advocacy case. There's a lot to be said here, and there's a lot that can be said about how to combat some of these. But it's important to remember that that does not mean that you shouldn't advocate for yourself. It's actually really, really important to work with a coach or to work with your peers and mentors to do it in a way that is well received by the companies. All right. So I mentioned a little bit, what are other ways to frame your advocacy? Here's 2 ideas that I'm personally a big fan of. So rather than just saying like to your friend, like, hey, I did this amazing thing, or I accomplished this amazing thing, isn't it great? Which usually may not come off the best, and be like, great, so what? Framing it as, a learning. And so rather than just talking about the work that you did, talk about what you learned, talk about how it can be helpful to others, talk about how it may relate to the work that others are doing. Make it into a best practice, make it into something that other people can share and use for their work, whether it's a template, whether it is a set of ideas. Hold lunch and learns and talk about them. Here's what I've learned. Here's some best practices. Here's me sharing it. Here's me helping you so that you can do less work. The second idea is framing it as a thank you. So expressing it as a thank you to the people and the collaborators and the people who contributed in making that project happen. So again, rather than saying, hey, we shipped this thing on time, it'd be thank you to all the engineers, designers, PMs, whomever, PMMs, data folks who really helped make this happen. And here are the challenges we came across, we overcame together. And here's what we've accomplished together. And that way, you not only know everyone who contributed, but also gives them a chance to sort of thank you back and actually advocate for themselves in the wins that and sort of share in the win and making themselves known. So it's a great way of helping you be more visible, but also anyone else on your team or in your partnership be visible as well. Some companies like Meta, for example, where I was at, this is such a regular thing that essentially it's expected. It became such a big part of the culture that it's pretty much expected that when you ship something or when you launch something, you write a thank you note out to everybody. And I just loved how it was a part of the culture to have essentially a way that's ingrained for people to advocate for the work that they've done and their team. All right, let's go to the last part. How are we doing on time? Doing good. Okay. Let's talk about conquering bias and performance reviews. So these are 3 bias. There's lots of different types of implicit biases out there. I'll talk about 3 of them for today that are pretty top of mind. One is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is essentially interpreting new evidence as confirming your belief. So when you get a new data point or when you hear a new fact, rather than changing your perspective based on the fact, you actually alter the fact in a way that confirms your beliefs. This is why often different people on a team will look at the same information and come up with completely different conclusions. It's because they are often trying to confirm, you have a tendency to try to confirm your existing belief rather than quote unquote believe the fact or question the fact instead. The second is negativity bias. So this is where if you do something not well, so let's say you did not launch something on time, this bias makes people more likely to perceive it as a pattern rather than a mistake. And they may perceive it as a more serious mistake than it actually is. This happens a lot with minorities. So for example, if you miss the launch day, it becomes, why does Yue always miss her launch dates? Like, and here's, how horrible missing that launch is when it, it's maybe not as bad as it seems. And actually I've met my other launch dates. And so that's negativity bias, where the negative thing tends to stick out and it tends to be more perceived as a pattern. And then the last is affinity bias, which I think many of us are familiar with, which is you're more likely to trust and favor people who you view as more similar to you. This is difficult because in terms of diversity, in terms of minorities, you often want to bring, your value is in bringing a different perspective. But sometimes, because of the affinity bias, you are more likely to perceive, you kind of have that negative consequence as being perceived as someone who's different, and they may trust you a little bit less because you have a different perspective. So it can be very challenging to figure out what's the right balance of being able to add value versus being slightly less trusted or favored because you're viewed as someone who's unlike them. So ways to combat these biases. And again, every situation is different. So use these as broad sort of strokes as a starting point. So first, ask them to imagine if you were a majority. I've used this multiple times, actually, personally in my career, where I said, this feedback is really surprising to me. If I were a white male, would you give me the same feedback? It's a very powerful question that puts that feedback in a different context, and really ask that person, hey, is there some bias here? I don't do it in an extremely challenging way, but it helps them think about, like, would I give that same feedback? Would it be the same or not? The second is sort of you try to describe the bias that you see and propose a resolution. So I advocate for using a simple situation complication resolution framework. So describe what you have observed someone else doing versus what you have done, and then describe sort of how things were different, how you were treated differently. Hey, I missed one launch, and it seems like there's this ongoing narrative about how I always miss launches versus this other person missed a launch, but it doesn't seem to be that type of narrative. Why do we think that that is? Or this happened and they were rewarded in this way, but I did the same thing, but I was not rewarded. Can you help me understand why that is? And have it be a conversation. And sort of bring it to the resolution, which is like, do we agree that there was some bias here? And if so, how can we avoid this in the future? How can we do better about this in the future? It does take a certain type of manager and a certain type of leader to engage in these types of conversations and be open to their biases being challenged. And actually, as a majority, if you're in the majority as a white male, if you see these things happening to others on your team, it's also very powerful to call them out and to say, like, look, I did this, here's what happened. My teammate also did this, but that didn't happen. So if you're mentoring somebody or if you're supporting somebody, this can be really powerful to help keep an eye out for your teammates, and to call out the bias. And then lastly, I will say, find more diversity friendly places. Again, diversity contributes to, like, leads to better business performance. This, again, research has shown over and over that diverse teams do better, generate more profits, generate more business growth. And so if you're in one of those places where you try to call out some of these biases, but sort of get shut down, or just be like, no, the conversation is not really going anywhere, it's important to kind of walk away, or in my opinion, run away from those places where you're not going to be able to just have a dialogue that's helpful, and instead look for leaders and managers and cultures that actually are very introspective and appreciate people calling these things out, because that in general makes a better work environment. It won't be just about bias. It'll apply to product strategy. It'll apply to operational effectiveness. It'll apply to almost everything across the board, in terms of how open people are to different perspectives, as well as different ways of doing things better. All right. This is one of my favorite comics of all time. So you start from the top left. You have these two little guys who have, it shows the type of bias, who have these little fires. One of them, amazing PM or amazing, person, puts the fire out immediately before it gets bigger. The other person kind of lets the fire grow and grow. And at some point they're like, look, we have a huge problem. And then they put out the fire. And what happens is everyone's like, oh my gosh, this person in the blue put out this giant fire. They're our hero, and they get celebrated, versus this person in the green who put out that fire early, never really got any attention. This happens all the time where you have somebody who is doing an amazing job at their job and putting out the little fires when they're little, doesn't get any credit for doing that. But instead, the person who's like, oh my gosh, I have a huge fire now that's burning, that's like disrupting everything, and then they're able to put it out, is viewed as this amazing hero. So that kind of brings me to my next thing, which is, when you're doing self-advocacy and when you're thinking about performance reviews, think about the things that you actually did that was delivered as expected. We tend to have this culture of, like, you always kind of have to, like, over deliver for some reason. Like, you have to launch early. The metrics have to be better than what you thought it was. And then if anything below that tends to be like, oh, okay, well, you just did your job. Great. The reality is, we often work in these environments on projects that are really, really complicated, that involve many parties, that have various types of risk in many different ways. And there's probably a really, really high chance that you won't deliver what you thought, your original goal. And so it's important to sort of pause and celebrate delivering as expected, make that known, advocate for it, talk about it, celebrate it as a group before you move on to the next thing. I personally was very guilty of this in the beginning of my career, where like before the feature even launched on launch day, I was like already thinking about my product spec for the next thing and already kind of moving on to the next project from a mental perspective. But instead, there's actually a good period of time that you can take after the launch to really make it known, to let people know what happened, to let people know how it went, and let people know like, here are the things that I overcame in order to do this on time. This is a picture of a cake that I brought for one of the launches we did at Instagram, which is a profile redesign. So it was a codenamed Project Nue, and we brought the cake on that day, and we invited leadership to come have cake. And in having leadership come have cake, we also told them exactly what we did and what happened. And it was another way, again, of making the story known of this is what happened. These are the challenges. This is, the results, etc. It's easier when there's cake. All right. Another final note about performance reviews is that they always happen. I think some people have this idea that unless you're working at a big company, there's no sort of official performance review. That may be true, but they still review performance, as in performance conversations always happen. And whether it happens at a set time with official reviews, or it happens kind of ad hoc or random, the way I encourage people to think about it is always know what your performance review would say if you were to get a performance review on a particular day. Again, don't stress yourself out and do this like every single day. It probably doesn't change like every day, but once a month, again, with the cadence of one-on-ones, like almost in your head, think about what your performance review would say and be like, is that what I wanted to say? Or do I want it to say something different? Or do I need it to say something different? If so, what is that? And how do I work towards that change that I want? And am I making progress towards it today? And so whether you have, again, going back to sort of some of the one-on-ones, whether there's an official process or not, it is very, very helpful to keep track of how you feel that you're doing. And so expectations at your current next level, how you're doing by dimension, feedback and progress, and then asking these questions on the right about how am I doing? How am I doing relative to other people on my team? How am I doing relative to people on other teams? If you're at a bigger company, it's not just relative to the people in your group, it's relative to all the PMs or all the growth marketers or all the customer support agents. It's not really just relative to yourself. And it also helps your manager get out of, oh, how is Yue doing just on my team? And then they have to kind of go to the other teams and think about, hey, how are those PMs doing? Or how are those engineers doing? And then think about and always keep jotting down examples where you are doing above your current level and performing at the next level. Like sometimes I encourage people in their career docs to actually just have a different section for that. Comes up really helpful if you have official written performance reviews to keep track of each of those little things and not have to go back, 6 months, a year later and say like, what did I do to, work on XYZ? It's much more helpful when you're in the moment to just jot them down quickly. All right, this is why it's important to sort of align and to regularly know where you are in terms of performance. This is a lot of words, so I'll walk through it. It's a bit of a story. So we have the first VP. We have a woman named Jane. Jane's been doing a great job. She wants to get promoted to VP. She's launched an amazing project, multi-quarter project, and has demonstrated she can show more scope. And her VP wants to put her up for promotion. Now we're in the promotion room. What happens is often there are multiple VPs or leaders together discussing said promotion. Peer VP says, well, I think Jane actually took the idea from Joe. Joe was working on the project, but she stepped in midway. They collaborated, but I don't think she deserves full credit. VP2 goes, I have a PM director who has also been leading multiple crossing projects and delivered double-digit increases in revenue, and he hasn't been promoted. Perhaps we consider promoting him first. Peer VP number 3. Well, was the impact calculated correctly and over the right time horizon? does this initiative inflate the numbers with some other initiative that we're doing? Like, should we really attribute this entire impact to Jane, or does other teams really deserve some credit? So you can see the direction this is going in. This is, again, a very synthesized example, but not too different from conversations that happen sort of in the room when your manager may be going in being like, I want Jane to get promoted. People raise these types of questions, and depending on how the room trends, she may or may not get the promotion. So what really happened, right? One, there's some unexpected vocal detractors in the room. One of the VPs felt like, Joe, somebody on their team, was not happy with Jane's performance. They weren't expecting that. Second, perhaps the overall team is underperforming. Perhaps what Jane's manager VP missed was that actually relative to other teams, while Jane may be doing the best on their team, relative to other teams, maybe she is not at the top. Maybe the manager is viewed as too subjective. I've seen this happen a few times where if they don't have someone else in the group that also advocates for the promotion, it might be like, well, Yue just really likes this person. And it actually kind of goes against you in the sort of favorability aspect where, well, Yue is just biased. She just thinks that Jane is awesome, but it's a subjective comment. And the last thing I'll say is that I've seen many promotions get derailed, unfortunately, with some small comment of hesitation from someone with a large amount of influence. There's always one or two people in that room who has some outsized influence on the conversation. And if they say something, even if it's not negative, it's like just a little point of hesitance, or are we sure about this? Or, do we really know this? It can turn the entire conversation. And rather than talking 10 minutes ago, they could be talking about how amazing this person was, and this person makes a neutral comment, and it could, steer the conversation another way. So it's a really dynamic sort of system that happens in the real conversation. So how do you avoid this? Again, you can't control everything, but there are things you can do to really set yourself up so that scenarios like this don't happen as often. First is know how your team and organization is doing. Not all managers do this, but you should, as much as possible, understand how your team is performing relative to other teams and organization. Second, enlist advocates for your promotion. This helps your manager not be perceived as biased. Your manager can actually help you do this as well, but you can also help yourself by finding other advocates at the company who are likely to be in that room or be in that conversation about the promotion, and get them to be on your side. Go tell them, this is what I'm working on. This is the impact I've had. I'm trying to be a VP or etc. And here's what I've done, and have that conversation with them. So that ahead of time, you can build a relationship with people and leaders outside of your existing team, who know what happened, know you, and can help steer the conversation as well. And then lastly, proactively asking for feedback, not just from your direct team, but from other leaders and teammates in the organization to avoid surprises. I think people often miss, they sort of know how their current team and their current management chain perceives what it is that they do, but they miss the people that they may have had just tangential contact with. And worked on one small thing, but didn't really think much about it. Really think about, and if you get a chance to, the influence map of your organization. Figure out who influences whom, who is very powerful in terms of promotion conversations, and make sure that the people they trust are people who also know who you are and can at least not speak negatively about you, but if not positively about you. All right. Geez, I'm like a little over on time. Sorry, guys. So we talked a little bit about your brand and superpower today. I wanted to put up this framework really quickly where promotions depend on more than just advocating for yourself and building a brand. It's one key component. Also depends a lot on your ability to influence your peers and your sponsorship, as well as the opportunity at hand. Again, you can do the bottom two things really well, but if there's not a business need and there's not a spot open for a new VP, that's not going to happen. And so opportunity tends to be something that you can't fully control, but you can influence luck. That's it. a little more about me and where to find me, I've got a Substack. I've got a career coaching website at yuezhao.coach. And then you can also find me on LinkedIn.